More likely than not, sometime in your life, you're going to come across somebody that says, hey, I'm a prophet of God, or I have a prophetic word from God. And the question is, how do we know if someone is truly a prophet of God? Is everyone who claims to be a prophet an actual prophet of God? And the answer is no, they are not. The Bible tells us, both Old and New Testaments, that there are going to be many people who claim to be a prophet of God and are false prophets. Well, does the Bible give us anything to show us how to tell the difference between a false prophet and a true prophet? The answer, thankfully, is yes. The Bible gives us 5 tests of someone to know if they're a true prophet or a false prophet. And the fact is that it doesn't matter how nice a person is, how sincere they seem, how godly they seem. If they don't pass all 5 tests, they're not a true prophet. Or even if they pass 4 of the tests and not one of the tests, then they're not a true prophet. We should not listen to them. So test number 1 is from Deuteronomy 13, 1 through 3. And in that scripture, God says, here's the test. If someone says, hey, I'm a prophet of God, and they predict the future, and then that future event does happen, but then they tell you to follow a different God, or they tell you something different about God that's not from Scripture, then we know that they're a false prophet. We should not follow them. Test number 2 is from Deuteronomy 18, verse 22. And in Deuteronomy 18, 22, God says, in this test, if they predict the future and that future thing does not happen, then they're not a true prophet of God. Test number 3 is from Matthew 7, 15 through 16, and Jesus said, many false prophets will come into the world, and that you will recognize them by their fruits. They may do a number of good works, but then also it's included often with scandals, things behind the scenes that eventually will come out to show that it was all about them in the first place. They were wolves in sheep's clothing. And then test number 4 is from Galatians 1, 8 and 9, where the Apostle Paul says, even if we or an angel of God preaches a gospel to you that contradicts what we preach to you, let him be accursed. In other words, if what they're saying contradicts the Bible and specifically the gospel of Christ, his death and resurrection for our sin and for our salvation, if they contradict that, they're not a true prophet of God. Then the 5th and the final test in the Bible is from 1 John 4, 1 through 3, which is kind of a twofold issue here. And he says basically this: if they come and they tell us something different about the nature of Jesus, if they say that Jesus is something other than fully God and fully man, then they're not a true prophet of God. Or if they just say, hey, all we need is God, we don't really need Jesus. In other words, Jesus isn't really the only way, we must not listen to them. They're not a true prophet of God. So even if they pass 3 of the tests and they don't pass 2 of the tests, they're not a true prophet. If they even pass 4 of the tests, but not 1 of the tests, they're not a true prophet of God. No matter how sincere, how charming they are, how wonderful a person they are, we must not listen to them. We always need to go back to Scripture and test it with the Holy Bible.